Are you a wimp or are you a courageous leader? It is impossible to be a successful leader without courage. Leadership requires courage. You can be bold and you can make tough decisions. You can do it. What are you thinking about? You gotta be alert. How many thought I retired?
Welcome to Answers That Work with Mike Moore.
Hello, I'm Mike Moore, and this is the Answers That Work broadcast. I'm so excited today to have you with us because I am teaching insights from my new book, The Big Pivot. We're talking about shifting our leadership focus from outward success to inward growth. And today, we're going to talk about courage. We're going to talk about shifting our focus from being a big wimp to being courageous, a courageous leader. We talk a little bit about courage. As a leader, you must possess courage. The Greek philosopher Aristotle called courage the mother of all virtues, because without courage, you cannot consistently, he says, perform the other virtues. This is also true in leadership. It is impossible to be a successful leader without courage. Why, Mike? Because you're making, as a leader, bold and sometimes unpopular decisions. See, leadership and courage involves dismantling traditions, entering into new things and new innovations. And it's something about changing folks' traditions will cause you some challenges, leaders. And it's something about introducing something new. People say that they want something new, but people really push back on new things initially. That's why you have to have courage. Leadership is not for wimps. Now, I mentioned in a prior episode that God called me into ministry out of law school. There was nothing in me, I promise you, nothing in me that wanted to be a minister or a pastor or even to stand out in front of people. I realized, even as a young believer, man, that's a position you got to know that God wants you in. And leadership, period, whether it's secular, whether it's religious, it just requires a lot of courage. You have to do things as a leader that may be unpopular. So we are saying that you have to make the shift, pivot from being a big wimp to courage. So let's talk about being a wimp, and then we talk about courage, because being transparent, I was a big wimp. When I first entered into ministry, I was literally scared. Now, what is a wimp? A wimp is a person who is not strong, not brave, not confident. All three of those things characterized me when I first entered into the leadership position as a pastor. A wimp is a leader who fails to do something or complete something as a result of fear or a lack of confidence. And you talking about fear, there were times when I would get up and preach, and this is the honest to God truth, my legs would be trembling. I ran from confrontation. I didn't want to deal with anything that was hard. I was thinking, can't we all just get along? I had to grow into becoming a courageous leader. We mentioned Saul in a prior episode, and Saul, the first king of Israel, was a weak leader. He was a wimp. He says something about himself in 1 Samuel 15:24. Saul gave in. This is the Message translation. Saul gave in and confessed, I've sinned. I've trampled roughshod over God's word and your instruction. He was talking to the prophet Samuel. I cared more about pleasing people. This is Saul speaking. I cared more about pleasing the people. I let them tell me what to do. And that's what a wimp is. It's a classic people pleaser. So are you a wimp or are you a courageous leader? Are you a wimp or are you a courageous leader? Let's look at some characteristics of what I call a wimpy leader. Leaders that are wimps make a lot of excuses. They are afraid to take ownership. Wimpy leaders avoid conflict because they are afraid of being hurt, being rejected, or feeling uncomfortable. Wimpy leaders procrastinate because they are afraid of making mistakes. A wimpy leader follows the pack because he or she is afraid to stand out. A wimpy leader is a people pleaser because he or she is afraid to upset people, and uh, they need their approval. And finally, a wimpy leader isolate themselves because they are afraid to be vulnerable or exposed. Now, notice the common denominator in all those characteristics. What did you hear? Afraid, afraid, afraid. Wimpy leaders are afraid, afraid, afraid. So let's talk about the courageous leader, because I grew. I wasn't perfect as a leader, as a pastor, but I grew. I grew where I could make some decisions. I grew to the point that I could be bold. And guess what? You can be bold and you can make tough decisions. You can do it. Now notice what God said to Joshua, following in the footsteps of Moses. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 6, the first part of the text in the New Living Translation, God is speaking to Joshua, who's preparing or has been prepared to be Moses' successor. God said to him, be strong and courageous, for you're the one who will lead these people. Man, he's following in the footsteps of Moses, one of the greatest leaders of all time. But God said to him, I want you to be strong and I want you to be courageous. So courage is a criteria. It is an ingredient. It is a necessity for successful leadership. Courage to do what? Courage to do four things in particular. Number one, courage to stand out front. Courage. It takes courage as a leader because, see, as a leader, whether it's sports, whether it's entertainment, whether it's business, whether it's in your family, you're standing out front. And it's something about standing out front that invites scrutiny, invites criticism. Anybody who stands out front. I remember when I first went on television, around 1994, I went on television, and I was so surprised at how many people noticed how I dress, and they will make comments on how I dress. Now, I wasn't thinking, I always tried to look nice, but I didn't know how people would view that, because when you're standing out front, People can see you. They can see whether your fly is open. They can see whether your shirt is out or pulled back and not is hanging out. They can see. It takes courage to stand out front because it invites scrutiny. It invites criticism. Courage is important to embrace responsibility. Leaders have to delegate because no leader can do everything. So you delegate responsibility for a task or for a project or for a department. And that the delegation expands you. So our church grew in numbers and it grew to be a really, really great church. But there were people that had to help me or did help me to do all the different things. So I would delegate authority and responsibility. I would delegate authority and responsibility. But ultimately, I couldn't delegate total responsibility. As the pastor, you as the CEO, you as the parent, you may delegate, but you're going to be held responsible for the overall success of whatever you're leading. You cannot delegate the overall responsibility. In other words, the buck stops with you. So even though you have people doing this and people doing this and you're giving them the ownership and the rights, ultimately people are going to hold you accountable or responsible. So as a church pastor, I was going to be held responsible because I was standing out front. It takes courage to embrace the responsibility. Third, it takes courage to accept accountability. Being accountable for the decisions that you make and being accountable for your behavior. As a pastor, I didn't write checks. As a pastor, I didn't set my salary. There was a board of directors that I was submitted to. There was a committee that studied everything about our church and the finances, and they established my salary. I was accountable to somebody. Every leader needs to be accountable to somebody. There's no such thing that I got my own thing, this is mine, I don't have to answer to anybody. I think that's bad when a leader doesn't have anyone that they look up to that can speak into their lives that they're accountable to. I think every leader needs accountability, but also it's important for leaders to hold others accountable. The people that you delegate to, the people that you have in positions of authority, it's important to hold those people accountable. Now listen carefully, not just for their performance, but hold them accountable for their attitudes. And that's where we miss it, especially in the church world. We don't hold people accountable for their attitudes. We hold them in some cases responsible, not many cases, but in some cases responsible for their performance, but we ignore people's attitudes. Now, when a leader doesn't hold the people under them accountable, several things or consequences take place. And whenever you don't hold people accountable for bad behavior or poor performance, then you communicate incompetence on your part. You communicate indifference on your part. And if you don't hold people accountable as a leader, maybe they're over this department or they're over that department, and you don't hold them accountable for their attitude and their performance, the culture of the environment, then you will destroy the morale of the high performers. Whenever you don't hold people accountable for performance, you're going to always have low performers, high performers. When the people who are under you see that you don't hold the low performers accountable, then you actually will undermine your credibility with the high performers. And then you will also tempt them to come down on the level of the low performers. So it's critical that we have the courage, number one, to stand out front. We have the courage, number two, to embrace responsibility. We have the courage, number three, to accept accountability. And then finally, and this is going to be where we're going to have to slow down, you have to have courage to make tough decisions. I pastored for over 42 years, and listen to me, people think it's just glamour. Oh, it's just glamour. No, 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 no. In a leadership position, whether it's leader over few or leader over many, and especially whenever anything you have grows, you're going to have to make tough decisions. That's the part that I didn't like. I'll be honest with you. That was the part I didn't like. I mentioned in a prior episode that there are things that you like, things you don't like to do as a leader. John Maxwell says it's not how diligent we are to do the things we enjoy, it's how conscientious we are to perform the tasks that we don't enjoy. And making tough decisions was something that I never enjoyed it. I never got to the point where I feel good about making this tough decision. I feel great about it. No, I never got to that point. I never got to the point. I always hated the tough decision, but I also embraced it, because I realized that tough decisions come with the territory. So let's talk for a minute. I want to give you some examples. I'll give you some examples from my world, but the principle applies to across the board. Why do tough decisions require courage? Why do tough decisions? When I talk about tough decisions, I'm talking about suspending a person. I'm talking about terminating their employment. I'm talking about transitioning people out of a role that they held for years. These are tough decisions. Tough decisions. I remember the first person that I terminated their employment. I cried like a baby. Serious. This is the honest to God truth. I cried like a baby. I had never done that before. And I was thinking through all the stuff, what people would think and what the person would think and their families and stuff. And I was embracing, their responsibility. In other words, I was taking on the blame for others' misbehavior or others' poor performance or others' bad attitude. And man, I cried like a baby. But I made the decision. And so sometimes you may cry about decisions you have to make. Moving people around. People don't like to be moved around. They don't like that. They don't like change. They don't like change, okay? So you have to make tough decisions. Why are tough decisions so difficult? Because tough decisions are risky. Tough decisions are risky. What do you mean by risky? In a tough decision, there will always be the possibility of loss and failure and things not working out well. In a tough decision, and here's the issue with it. As a leader, especially over the long haul, if you're in positions of leadership, you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. You may not want to make them, but you're going to make, that's not a bad confession. You're going to make bad decisions. And see, over those 40 years, I made some bad decisions. Okay, here's what I learned. I'm going to say this right quick. Here's what I learned. That if your heart is right, Okay, you're not ego tripping. You're not trying to throw your weight around. You don't want to hurt people. When your heart is right, God will allow you to make mistakes and keep you. I also learned this about people, that most people don't require you to be perfect, but they require you to be honest. And if you're honest and you have a heart to please God, then God will pick you up and keep you moving even though you make mistakes. The reason tough decisions require courage is because tough decisions will be questioned. Okay, why did you do that, Pastor Mike? Why do you do that? And they're tough because sometimes you cannot go public on the decision you make. In other words, you can't say, okay, this is why I did it. This is why I terminated that person. No, you can invite a lawsuit when you start public and telling people business. So here you make the tough decision, but you can't fully disclose publicly everything that's private about the individual. That's tough. Tough decisions carry consequences. In other words, these consequences are unavoidable. All decision making will earn the leader favor or disfavor. All this tough decision, it's going to earn you favor, disfavor. In other words, when you make a tough decision, it's going to always be someone who does not like the decision. It's going to be very rare that you make a tough decision and everybody's going to say, yes, oh, wow, girl, that's great. No, you can hear God. God can tell. There were times that God said, make this change. And he said, make it. I want you to make this change. And I would make the change that God told me to make. God told me. I wasn't making it up. God told me to do it. And one time I made a change, and then God came back and said, you're going to do more changes. There are more changes you need to make. I'm thinking, no, God, I don't want to do no more. I don't want to do no more because the folk don't like the ones that I've done. It's tough sometimes being a leader. You have to make tough decisions. Often, tough decisions lead to misunderstanding. Think about it. Here, Jesus never sinned. He was perfect. Perfect, like 100, like no blemishes, never doing anything wrong. And yet people misunderstood him. Think about that. They misunderstood him. They misunderstood Jesus. Jesus. Think about it. Jesus said, I'm the Son of God. Can you imagine what the people think? Man, hush. I remember when you lived down the street from my uncle. You live down the street. I know your brother. I went to high school with your brother. How you going to be the Son of God? I saw you as a little boy. I remember when you worked in that carpenter shop. How you going to be some Son of God? Think about it. There were people who misunderstood Jesus, and they're going to misunderstand you. I want to share with you quickly about some tough decisions. One of the toughest decisions, I'm talking ministry now, but it applies in other arenas. The complacent long-timer. You have people that's been in your organization, your business, whatever, for a long time, and they work real hard for the first 20 years. The second 20 years, they're just picking up a check. They're picking up a check. Why? Because they feel like they have paid their dues. So in other words, I work hard for you for 20. Now for the next 20, I'm doing nothing. You have to deal with those people. You got to deal with those people. I don't care how committed they were. If they're no longer committed, no longer performing, no longer bringing value, you got to make a decision. And then there is this second one is tough. Oh my goodness. The life suckers. The life suckers are the people who are really gifted, they're very talented, they bring value, but they have a bad attitude. Nobody want to be around them, but they bring value. You don't want to get rid of them because they bring value, but they destroy the culture because they have a bad attitude. So we let people that if they can perform, they can have a bad attitude. They can talk to people any kind of way, act in any kind of way, when they want to, long as they get the job done, and you destroy the culture. And then the last person, this is the toughest one. This is the toughest decision that I had to make as a pastor. This is a tough one. But the principle applies in every area. This is the good guy. The good guy. You got to deal with the good guy. You got to terminate the good guy. You got to move the good guy. You got to do something about that good guy, because that good guy is not bringing value to it. This is the person that everyone likes. Everybody likes this person. I mean, personality, wonderful personality. Everybody just love this person. Yet, they're the wrong fit for the position they're in. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows they're the wrong fit for it. Not only that, they now can't or won't do the job, but everybody like them, or they're not doing the job, they're not performing anymore, not bringing any value, but they want to remain in the position. That's a tough decision. Because the moment you make a change on that person, the people going to say, well, that was a nice person. I mean, how in the world could you terminate a nice person like that? How could you move a nice? Why? Because they're not bringing value anymore. They nice, people like them, but they're not bringing any value. They're the wrong fit for the position. Oh my goodness. I don't want I don't want to frighten you out of being a leader, but I do want you to have a realistic understanding that leadership requires courage. I'll talk to you in just a moment. I wrote The Big Pivot, Shifting Your Leadership Focus from Outward Success to Inward Growth, because character matters. It is a character book. So many leaders focus on the big reputation, they focus on how they start, they focus on big talk. But if you don't have inward character, the things that you achieve and the things that you work so hard for won't be lasting. The Spirit of the Lord said this to me, that the next move of God will be in the area of character. Not just achievement, not just reaching the top of the ladder, but character, who you are in your private space. And that's what this book is about. It's about who you are in your private world, because if your private world is not right, it will eventually spill over in your public spaces. It's pivoting from big reputation to character. Pivot from big start to discipline. Pivot from big shot to humility. Pivot from big wimp to courage. And pivot from big talk to competence. So you want to get a copy of The Big Pivot. I just finished talking about making the pivot or shifting from being a big wimp to courage. It requires courage. If you're going to lead in any arena in life, you're going to have courage, because you're going to have to make some bold decisions. And in some cases, it will not feel good for those that you're leading. I remember when my son, who is now my pastor and doing a wonderful work in ministry, I remember when he first came into the ministry full time, and he was coming to work late. And I pulled him aside and I said to Mike, I said, Mike, listen, you, my son, I love you, but this is God's work. And if you keep coming late, I'm going to fire you, Mike. I looked him in the face. I said, I'm going to fire you. I don't want to, but I'm going to fire you. Now, that would have been a tough decision. It would have required courage. And so, leaders, sometimes you're going to have to deal with family members, you're going to have to deal with friends, you're going to have to deal with people that you love in your ministry or whatever you're over, but you're going to have to make tough decisions. I want you to get my book, The Big Pivot, because I delve deeper into this issue of leadership. It'll bless you. Go to MikeMoore.com and order The Big Pivot. Now remember, the Word of God is the answer.
Thank you for watching Answers That Work with Mike Moore.